but we are completely comfortable with the fact that children may inadvertently see these images, because it's far more important that these images are seen and lives are saved and the injustice is ended, and then there'll be nothing for children to be upset about because it will be finished. It's far more important we do this life-saving work and end this injustice than it is to pack up these pictures, put them away, and protect maybe some people from momentary upset. Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion. Today I want to tackle a question that was sent in to me because I believe it's a good question, an honest question, and a question that will be relevant to many of our listeners. I get questions and even objections, criticism, as you can imagine, sent in from time to time. And I try to do a couple of things. I try to discern, is this an honest and sincere question that's seeking to be constructive, whether for me or for the person sending it? And also, is this a really important question that other people should be encouraged to think through? And I felt that in this case, it was both an honest, sincere question, well-meaning, constructive, but also one that's relevant to many. So I thought it was worth the time bringing this before all of you for your consideration. I'll just read an extract from the email that was sent in to tee up the discussion point for today. So it reads like this. I won't say who it's from. I'm sure he wouldn't mind anyway. He's a brother that I've met once or twice. Lovely guy who's kind of been on the edges of our public education work. And here's what he says. Hi, Dave. Hope you're doing well. I've started listening to the About Abortion podcast and finding it very informative. Thank you for your dedication to this work. I wanted to ask you a question with something I'm personally struggling with. Me and my wife are wanting to start street work to begin to change public opinion. We totally agree with having large-scale images of children within the womb. However, as parents, we are struggling with the idea of having large-scale pictures of aborted children. If we ourselves want to protect our children or our child from these images, how can we expect to put these images on other children? I wanted to ask how you came to the conclusions you have, as I know you will use the images on the streets. We are praying in our naivety that if we are wrong, the Lord may change our hearts in this. We want to work in partnership with CVR UK and are going to view some displays locally. We're hoping that until the Lord changes our hearts, we may use images of children within the womb. Any advice or direction from yourself would be greatly appreciated. God bless you. So as I'm sure you can hear there, this is a real question. This is from a couple who care about the issue. They want to do something about it, and it's a very valid and reasonable question, because essentially it's holding next to each other two seemingly contradictory concerns. One is that very right and natural parental instinct to shield our own children, and indeed other people's children, from things that are not age appropriate, things that might be upsetting or harmful. And it's important to draw a distinction between upsetting and harmful, but in the case of children, that line is admittedly harder to define. With adults, I'm much more comfortable with saying that upsetting is not always harmful, and indeed you could say rarely. Sometimes it's certainly necessary. But with children, we want to shield them from unnecessary, and that's a key word, trauma or being exposed to things that are not pure and lovely. And I'm a father, and I totally appreciate this concern. Indeed, as with others involved in this work, we have not shown to our young infant children abortion pictures. Indeed, we've done our best to shield our own children from those, and I believe we have successfully done that so far. No doubt one of these days they will, despite our best efforts, because of the nature of the work we do. They may well bump into it on a laptop, on a screen, in my office, whatever. Though we do our best to shield them from that, and it's precisely for the reason indicated by my friend and brother here, it's right and natural we seek to protect our children from these things. However, I accept that there is a possibility my children are going to see these pictures at an age that is suboptimal, that is before what I would consider the optimal age for them to see it. I accept there is a risk, and although we make every effort to safeguard against that, that is a risk I'm willing to take. Or to put it in other words, I'm not willing to stop doing what we're doing, be that on the streets or in any other context, purely to protect my children from the possibility of seeing these images. And I have essentially the same attitude with regard to other children out there. Now, I'm going to talk specifically about our work on the streets here because that's what's in view. So let me just clarify how we do things on the streets, and then I want to explain our justification for doing it in that way. So when we do our public education work, for example, here in Norwich, there are certain things we do to try to reduce the possibility of children seeing these images. And just to be clear, as my brother said, we're talking about the images of the victims of so-called abortion, babies who've been killed in the womb, the victims of this act of violence that we falsely call healthcare. That's what we're talking about today. Now, if anyone wants to object to children seeing images of living babies, I'm afraid I have much less time for that. We had that recently. You might have seen it. In fact, this kind of went quite big. It hit international news. It went all over America. We were in Keswick doing a display recently of just a living image. Sometimes we use just a living image. That was covered up by locals, and one of the chief cover-uppers was specifically citing children as her justification, saying, what if children see this? And at that very time, children were coming up to these images and saying, this is beautiful, this is amazing, wow, mummy, it's a baby. And they intuitively recognized the beauty, the majesty of life in the womb. So children are not upset by the living image. Adults often are. That's another story. But children never are. So we're just talking about the use of graphic abortion imagery here. So here in Norwich and elsewhere, we will put signs up maybe 20, 30, 40 yards down the road with a warning saying, warning, graphic abortion imagery ahead. And that's giving people a chance to divert their course, and in particular, if they've got children, to decide not to walk past those images or to shield their eyes, as indeed many parents do. We see them doing that. Another way we seek to reduce the chances of children seeing this is where we tend to position ourselves. So we don't do our displays, outside primary schools, or indeed, where possible, we'll do it, certainly in Norwich, during school hours, so that most children are in school. There are various things that we do to make it clear we're not targeting children. We won't speak to children. We won't invite children to look at the images. We don't force anyone to. We will initiate with adults. We won't initiate with children. So let's be clear. We're not targeting children, but let's be honest. There is a risk that children are going to see these images. They sometimes do. How can that be justified when we seek to protect our own children from such imagery? Well, there are two key things that I want to kind of peg down into the ground for starters. And unless these are in place, the rest isn't going to make sense. There are two things we need to be really clear on. And even if we already believe them, maybe we don't believe them with enough conviction and clarity for them to dictate what we do next. The first thing we need to recognize is that real children are being killed in the womb through abortion. Real children are being killed. Now, I know my brother believes this and he cares about this, but I'm speaking for myself. I need to regularly remind myself what's really going on here. Real children are really being killed. And because it's not seen, because it's called healthcare, because it takes place behind closed doors, and it's being executed by professionals, healthcare professionals, so-called, in their white coats, we are just desensitized. Even we pro-lifers, we're desensitized to the reality of what's going on here. We need to be reminded that real children are really being killed. And I think and that's why the images are so important, because they help us to see what is unseen. They help us to register what we might even know conceptually, but it's quite abstract until we see it. So if we were to imagine that instead of 800 plus babies in the womb were being killed every working day. If we were to imagine that it was 5-year-olds, okay, imagine that several thousand 5-year-olds were being killed up and down our country every week. Would we be asking, and people working to expose that genocide and draw attention to it and show the facts and the reality and wake people up because it's being denied or ignored, would people be asking the question, hang on, how does this make 5-year-olds feel if they see these pictures? I don't think we'd even be asking that question, because the gravity and the significance of the genocide of 5-year-old children would be so, it would weigh so heavily, it wouldn't even occur to us to ask about how this campaign affects other children. I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but I am talking about a weighing of considerations. And that's really, I think, the critical point in all of this is a weighing of considerations. And we have a duty to make a right call, a discerning judgment based on the weight of different concerns and considerations. So let's make sure that first tent peg is firmly in the ground. Real babies, real children are really being killed at a mass scale. That we've got to have that clear in our minds. The second thing we need to have very clear in our minds, the second sort of tent peg, is the pictures do save lives. Okay, the pictures really do change minds and save lives. Now, if they didn't, there would be little to no justification for using these pictures, certainly where they could be seen by people that it could upset or even damage. And I think often we rush past that point. We sort of assume, or we act as though the pictures don't really save lives. Because if we accept the pictures do, and I can give you evidence for that, we've got testimony after testimony of changed minds, people saying, now that I've seen this, I don't think abortion's okay. We've got examples of babies alive today because their parents saw these images, sometimes just on the cusp of having an abortion. I heard a wonderful story recently. I was down in Sussex speaking somewhere, and my hosts, actually, I was staying with a family I didn't know. They very kindly took me in, friend of a friend sort of thing. And one of my hosts shared a beautiful story. She volunteers with, through her church, she volunteers with a local school, and she was taking, I think, a group of children from the school to the church to visit the church. And on this trip, a little girl called Ruby spoke to her and said, "Oh, I love the church." And so my friend said, "That's interesting. Why?" And she said, "Because when I was a baby in my mummy's tummy, a nice lady from the church, showed a picture to my mummy of what they were going to do to me in the tummy. And thanks to seeing that picture, they didn't hoover me out of my mummy's tummy, and I'm alive today. I love the church." It's a beautiful story, and would it be wonderful to hear hundreds of testimonies like that? Because all over the country, people from the church are prepared to show the reality of abortion, which is enough to save a life like Ruby's. And that's just one story of many. So the pictures really do save lives. Okay, so we're talking about a life-saving measure here. We're talking about an emergency life-saving measure, but it's not just about saving people on the cusp of that act of violence and deception. We're talking about going upstream and being preemptive. There are thousands of people who see every single display we do. Many of those may not be pregnant. They may not be considering an abortion at that moment in time. But having seen that image, seen the reality, they have something now in their consciousness that can safeguard them from that fatal, lethal decision. Because all they'll ever get from anywhere else is that abortion is healthcare and it's not a baby yet. So those are the two things we need to remind people of if they know it already, or convince people of if they're not yet convinced: the humanity of the baby, the inhumanity of what we call abortion. Okay, the majesty of life in the womb and the horror, the violence of this procedure that we call abortion. We've got to expose both, because as it's been said before, a picture of a nice, healthy 11-year-old or 13-year-old, whatever, Jewish boy at his bar mitzvah is not enough to convince you of the horror of the Holocaust. It might be enough to humanize this little Jewish boy, but it doesn't do much to show you the horror of the Holocaust. There are pictures that do show you the horror of the Holocaust. And you know, some things are so evil, maybe they need to be seen to be believed. Because certainly until you see, for example, these awful Holocaust pictures of bodies literally piled up of all these people brutally killed by the Nazi regime, it is hard to believe it really happened. It's hard to believe that humanity is capable of such things, even if we doctrinally believe in the sinful nature and so on. And we're tempted to believe that those who are telling us such things are exaggerating. They're just over-egging it. But pictures are incredibly objective, and they accurately show what's going on. So we have to have those two tent pegs in place before we go any further. Real babies are really being killed, and the pictures really do save lives. So to put it the other way, if pictures are not shown, I'm talking about abortion pictures here, if abortion pictures are not shown, real babies, savable babies, will be killed. Okay, that's the decision we're facing here. That's what's at stake. And we don't want to be careless about what we're doing. We try not to be careless. But let's be very clear. The decision before us is, will we prioritize protecting one group of children from the possibility or the risk of seeing something that may not be age appropriate, might be upsetting, could even be traumatizing, damaging, although I question that, but I acknowledge that it could be. Will we prioritize protecting that group of children from that damage over protecting a much larger group of children from an act of violence that violently kills them? That's the decision that is before us. And it's about making a reasonable, justified judgment in that situation. Now, we live in a fallen world. We have limited resources. The arena for operating is not always of our choosing. We have to make a reasonable judgment. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine that in a primary school, an office worker, say an administrator, a personal assistant to the head teacher, whatever, someone who works in an office in the school, is taken seriously ill, perhaps a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. And so the emergency services are called, paramedics rush through the school. Now, that could be upsetting to children. Seeing these paramedics run around the place could be upsetting. And of course, if they have to take this worker who's fallen ill out of the private office and transport this person through the school hall or through the playground or whatever, there's a chance that children are going to see what's going on and be upset, maybe traumatized, maybe seriously traumatized, maybe it will stick with them forever. The question is, would it therefore be right to deny that office worker medical aid purely because you want to protect children from being upset or even traumatized? Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of About Abortion. I hope you're appreciating these podcasts, and if you are, can I ask for your help in getting these vital messages to more people? We're delighted that we can get these to people free of charge, but that's not free for us to produce. It costs something like £300 to £400 a month to get these podcasts produced, and I wonder if you could help us, partner with us financially. Many of us will have an Amazon Prime subscription or some kind of streaming platform to the tune of £6, £7, £8 a month. I wonder if you consider, as it were, taking out a subscription with us. If you could donate, say £8 a month, if we had about 40 people donating around £8 a month, just £8 a month, that would help us to continue to do these podcasts free of charge for anyone who wants to listen in. And this is the only podcast specifically about abortion in the UK. It's the greatest injustice, not only of our time, but in all history. Would you help us to bring these life-saving messages to more people? And don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. Do send this in particular to your church leaders and anyone else you think might be interested. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll let you get back to the episode now. I think the reasonable response in such a situation is you prioritize the saving of a life, and you do what you can to reduce or eliminate, where possible, other people being harmed or distressed in the act. So, of course, you try and clear the playground, you try and clear a path, you try and distract the kids, make space, whatever. But ultimately, you're not going to slow down the life-saving treatment or measures that you're taking, because saving a life is of utmost importance in terms of humanitarian concern. Protecting feelings and so on is of lesser importance. So the decision we have here is protecting children from violence or protecting children from being upset or seeing something that's not at the optimal moment in their development. I would even go so far as to say that even if a child, and let me make it clear again, we don't target children on our public education displays, and we do what we can to avoid children on our public education displays. But I could make the case, I'd be happy to make the case that even for those children who, against our design and best intentions, you could say, do engage and see the display, even for those very children, you could argue that it's better for them that they've seen that picture at an age too young than it would be if they never saw the picture in their whole lives. Because there's a very real safeguarding risk. 1 in 3 girls in the UK, 1 in 3 is expected to go on and have an abortion. That is to say, 1 in 3 girls is expected between the age of 15 and 45 to give consent to the killing of the baby in her womb. That is a major safeguarding concern. Major, probably the biggest you can imagine. In terms of protecting even her feelings, even that little girl's feelings. Let's say we're talking about a 6-year-old here. Protecting that little girl's feelings in a long-term sense because of the trauma of abortion itself. Post-abortion trauma is real. Mental health dives after an abortion so often. Suicide rates rocket after an abortion. Relationships fall apart. Addictions proliferate after an abortion. Even if it's only about the feelings and welfare of these children, you could make the case it'd be better for them to see that picture age 6 than for them to never see it at all, because it's enough to save them from making that decision themselves when they're older. Again, I say, we're not targeting those children. We try to make sure they don't see it, but I'd be happy to take that position and argue that even for them it'd be better. Now, if that sounds outlandish, that sounds cavalier, I'd like you to consider the way in which anti-drink driving campaigns will show deliberately shocking videos to primary school children in assemblies to warn them of the dangers of drink driving. Now, I remember seeing this very vividly myself. I don't remember what age I was. I think I was about 10 or 11 when they came into my school and showed a video that was deliberately shocking. It's you know the scene. It's similar to the adverts you'll see on TV sometimes, where everything is happy and people having a great time. There's a party, they're driving along, and these adverts deliberately lull you into a false sense of security, and then suddenly smash, and there's blood everywhere, and someone's clearly been killed, and it's all over, and it's all because of drink driving. And this is done deliberately to shock and upset and to stick in the memory, you could even say traumatize, young children. Now, how is that justified? We could have an argument over what age that's appropriate at. And I believe they will ask parental permission before doing that and so on. But the case is obvious, isn't it? They consider it's more important to save a child from being killed, age 17, 18, whatever, through a foolish decision of drink driving. They consider it more important to save them from that than it is to save them from being upset on a Tuesday morning at school. So there is a case. There could be a case for proactively bringing these images to primary school children. Proactively, perhaps not coercively, perhaps with parental permission, but proactively, because they're far more likely to be involved in the deliberate killing of an unborn child when they grow up than they are to be involved in a drink driving accident. Statistically, it doesn't even bear comparison. So the case could be made, but that's not really what I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to make the case that there is the risk we're taking with children seeing these images is justified, even it's necessary. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is we take these pictures out of the public square, which is more or less the only place where they are, and then the pictures are nowhere. And we're doing exactly what the baby genocide industry wants, exactly what they've campaigned for, what they've already started in a kind of localized sense with the buffer zones. They've banned the showing of pictures, the offering of information, support, help, even prayer, even silent prayer in the vicinity of clinics. They've already banned that. And their goal would be to ban it everywhere. so that you can't show these pictures anywhere in public. And of course, I don't think we've ever seen any pictures like this on television. You can put it on YouTube and you often get censored. There'll probably be a little information box at the bottom of this video from YouTube, educating you all on what abortion really is with a load of euphemisms and calling it healthcare. So if we were to, in a bid to protect the feelings of children who might see these images, and we're talking about a trickle of children each time at most, if we, in a bid to protect them from that, we take the pictures out of the public square, we are effectively delighting the abortion industry and Satan, who would love the reality of this to be suppressed and nowhere to be seen. And that's really the decision that lies before us. Now, I would be the first to concede that consent, in terms of people consenting to see the image, consenting to engage, has huge benefits in terms of persuasiveness and in terms of those conversations going well. I think it makes for a much more powerful educational experience where possible to proceed by consent. That is to say, people are opting into seeing the pictures and engaging. And certainly when I go to churches, that's how I do things. I will give people plenty of warning, and I give them the choice whether they keep their eyes open to see what I'm going to show or not. And I'll encourage them to see it. I'll explain why. But I never spring it on them in the church. I always give them warning and let them decide. Now, again, someone could certainly level the charge of hypocrisy, or how come you give them the choice in church, but you don't give them the choice out in the streets? Well, it's a good question, and the answer is this. If I could get everyone in a room in the country, and if I had the environment, and even in the church, there's only a fraction, a tiny percentage of churches that are willing to engage in this issue. But if we could ensure that every school showed these pictures and every doctor's clinic showed these pictures, the abortion providers showed these pictures, every church, every university, if we can ensure all of that, there'd be no need for us to do our work. But the reality is, almost every arena, including the church, has been complicit in the silencing and censoring of the truth about abortion, and the streets is pretty much the last place left where we can do our work without censorship. And so I'll gladly operate in a consent-based environment where I can explain things prior to showing the image, and where I can provide pastoral support and prayer after showing the image, and where we can have Q&A and whatever else. And the church is the best place to do this, because you've got all of that there. You've got the prayer support. You've got the people who can counsel. You've got the pastor and the context of teaching, and it's a family, and there's a long-term relationship there. But when the streets is all we're left with, again, the decision we're faced with here in the real world is, do we continue to expose the genocide in a way that we know saves lives and change minds and begins to turn the tide, because people see what this thing really is, whether they're pregnant or abortion-minded or not? Do we continue to expose that which is essential in ending it? We can't find a single example in the whole history of successful social reform of reformers ending an injustice by covering it up. And they would have had exactly the same issues that we're talking through today. What about children seeing pictures of slaves in chains, or slaves being hung on a hook like a fish as a form of execution? What about children hearing about all the horrific treatment of these slaves? What about those who've come out of the slave industry? What about those whose livelihoods depend on the slave industry? What about those who just sincerely think they're doing the best thing and they don't know what is going on in the slave industry? These issues have always been here. They never go away. There have always been people who are upset by the exposing of injustice, but injustice has to be exposed. So I guess my sort of bottom line on this would be, we do what we can to make it clear that we are targeting adults, not children here. We do what we can to protect children from seeing this where possible, but we are completely comfortable with the fact that children may inadvertently see these images, because it's far more important that these images are seen and lives are saved and the injustice is ended, and then there'll be nothing for children to be upset about because it will be finished. It's far more important we do this life-saving work and end this injustice than it is to pack up these pictures, put them away, and protect maybe some people from momentary upset, but doing less to end the genocide. So to my brother who sent this question, and I hope that's been helpful, I hope that if you're not convinced by what I've just said, that you will indeed continue to do work with living images only. That's still effective. That still does a lot of good. Indeed, sometimes we do that for specific reasons. And actually, in the case of Keswick recently, I deliberately chose to use just a living image because it was a family event. The convention that was happening nearby where we're doing our display was a family event, a lot of children around. It's a holiday location. And on that occasion, that was the judgment I made, that actually in terms of reaching people, recruiting and making the point, but without an unnecessary degree of certainly distracting, I felt it would be a distracting degree of upset that could be avoided. In that instance, we did opt for the living image only, and that was fruitful. People still tried to cover it up, and they still said that, what about the children? But I hope my brother certainly continues with the living image only activity, but I hope also he can see where we're coming from with the use of the abortion imagery. And I hope that we can indeed work together towards the ending of this injustice.